From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health. And now here is our host and producer, Hilda Labrada Gore.
Hey, Hilda here. Do you ever feel like you're on a therapeutic treadmill? Like you've tried one protocol after another without much success or any significant progress to your health? This is episode 476, and our guest today is Dr. Leland Stillman, a concierge integrated medical doctor in Naples, Florida, and he is the founder of Leland Stillman Integrative Medicine. Today, Leland goes over how a mineral deficiency coupled with toxins in the body could lead to just the sort of scenario I was describing, where you spend all of your money and all of your time chasing health. He points out today that there is seldom one root cause that leads to illness. That said, he considers heavy metals like mercury, lead, and aluminum to disrupt our health, and our mineral imbalances contribute to the issues we face. Leland goes over today the minerals we need, like zinc, and those we may have too much of, like copper. He also explains why it's never a good idea to randomly take supplements at high doses for long periods of time. Before we get into the conversation, I want to remind you that we at the Foundation have resources in Spanish and Español, including our Tradiciones Sabias podcast hosted by Annette and Alberto. We've also got pamphlets, an Instagram account, and more. Go to our website, westonaprice.org, for the full rundown of what's available. Just click on the WAPF en Español button. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Leland.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Look, you and I have been friends for a bit, and I would say a number of years, actually. And I've noticed a shift in your blog posts and on your social media with a big emphasis on hair mineral analysis testing. Why the shift?
Great question. So I think I've been through the whole functional medicine world, lots of different protocols, treatments, mentors, ways of practicing. And I've concluded that pound for pound, there is no better test out there for getting people the results they want than the hair tissue mineral analysis. This is for the two broad categories of people that I see in my practice. Category one being the folks who say my labs are normal, but I feel terrible or have lots of symptoms and problems. And category two, my labs are not normal, but no one can tell me why. And the reason for this, I'll tell you a story about what woke me up to this, is a case that came into my practice, early 30s, young woman in the healthcare field, a practitioner, struggling to get pregnant, struggling with a severe life-threatening autoimmune disorder. And we looked at her numbers, her labs, her diet. It was just perfect. I mean, very, very few people can I say that about who I meet without extensively counseling them prior to meeting them. She was doing all of the things, the sauna, the red light, the sunlight, the blue blockers at night, all the things that people who listen to your podcast by now have heard ad nauseum and hopefully are doing. Although a lot of you out there listening, you're not as compliant or consistent as you could be. She was doing all these things. She was working so hard to get pregnant and reclaim her health. We did a variety of different tests. My suspicion was heavy metal toxicity. We looked at some hair testing, and then we treated her with a protocol for that. And heavy metals just started to pour out, and specifically copper, which I know a lot of your listeners have heard about is a nutrient. It's true, but people will get overloaded. And there really is this thing called copper toxicity that she was suffering from. And she's now rounding the corner into her third trimester, has not been in the hospital, and is not struggling with her health practically at all. And she and I both agree that what really helped her turn the corner and accelerate into healing was the supplements based upon her hair tissue mineral analysis testing. So that case really woke me up to the fact that this was a huge, huge, incredibly powerful tool for me to help people get well.
So why don't heavy metals show up in a regular blood workup, a lab workup that's normal? Why does it have to be hair tissue analysis?
Great question. What people need to realize about their bodies is that the minute heavy metals hit the bloodstream, the body tries to equilibrate them by putting them away in tissue where they won't hurt anything. How does this work? So there's a number of famous cases of people who've died from mercury poisoning within a matter of hours to days with just exposure to drops of mercury. The lethal dose of mercury could fit on the end of your pinky finger. And these people, if they're exposed to the wrong source or form through their skin, it can be absorbed so quickly that it kills them. And it's not that the amount of mercury that they're absorbing is lethal if it's distributed around the whole body. It's that it's lethal if it's hitting the bloodstream that quickly all at once. So the body is very quickly trying to move these heavy metals into tissues. And because of that, we end up with a high total body burden of heavy metals as we get older, depending upon how much pollution we're exposed to, where we live, what we eat, what we drink, how much we do to mitigate this with things like sauna or coffee enemas or supplements or healthy diet, all these things that we know to be good for people. Obviously, in moderation in all things, you can overdo any of those things as well, I should hasten to add. But you'll see that. And what will happen is when the body gets run down, it doesn't have the energy and the nutrients in order to get those heavy metals out of the cells and then push them out of the body through either the kidneys, the gut, or the hair. The hair is fundamentally an excretory tissue. Your body is excreting things into the hair. Heavy metal levels will increase if you increase them in the diet in the hair, but what you will more often see causing huge elevations in heavy metals in the hair is not an acute exposure, but getting the patient's mineral balance right. Because what ends up happening with metals is that they don't just hang out in free space in the body. They end up replacing minerals on enzymes. And this is a concept known as ionic mimicry. This is not the world according to Dr. Stillman. This is not just fancy wellness doctor made this up this morning before my cup of coffee. This is really in the literature. Metals and minerals interact. They compete with one another, and metals will go into cells and they will get into enzyme systems and they will sit there. And this does two things. Number one, your enzymes don't work well when heavy metals are on them. Arguably, they don't work at all. But even if they work a little bit, you're going to be running at a very reduced capacity, right? Now, so your normal machinery is not working now. It's been impaired by these heavy metals. Then they create a lot of free radicals, which create a lot of stress, which creates a lot of cellular damage, which then creates what we call aging, disease, decay. That's why, I mentioned earlier, heavy metals are the most toxic things on the planet, right? I mean, if you compare it to glyphosate, which your listeners know, and I'm not saying glyphosate's safe. I'm not saying glyphosate is good for you.
No.
I avoid it like the plague. But to give you some scale, people who commit suicide with things like pesticides douse themselves in the pesticide. They're exposed to liter quantities. By comparison, I quoted earlier, people exposed to heavy metals like certain forms of mercury very acutely, just a few drops can kill them. So this is the most toxic group of things on the planet. But because they get stuck in these enzyme systems, it's a little bit like you don't throw out your toaster that doesn't pop the toast up high enough until you've got a replacement. You don't get rid of your blender until you've got a replacement, because even though it leaks a little bit or the blade's a little funny or the lid's kind of broken or just looks a few years too old to still be in use, you don't have a replacement. And the body's the same way. So people will come in and they'll say, and this is one of the biggest misconceptions I see out there from people who've ordered their hair testing online and didn't really have a consultation with a clinician who knows and understands it. They'll say, well, I didn't have a lot of heavy metals on my hair testing, so I must not have a high heavy metal burden. But then when you get the body's energetic systems back online, you see these heavy metals and also excess minerals like copper just roll out of people. We'll see elevations that are 20-fold, 50-fold, 100-fold. And that coincides, generally speaking, with significant shifts in their health. Often people will describe, what we describe what are called detox reactions, which I think needs a little bit of unpacking and explanation. It's not just toxins coming out. There's a lot that can explain that. But that's what we see, and that's why the heavy metals so often evade people's notice. And I think it's why in the integrative health space, particularly, people are busy chasing everything from viruses and artificial light and EMF. And I'm not saying those things aren't important, right? There's a lot to be known and learned about these things, but people are missing the boat on heavy metals. And as far as my practice goes, I've never had better results than when I really looked at those as the root of the problem for my recommendations and how I treated people with nutritional supplementation protocols.
Okay, so I want to back up for a second because the Weston A. Price Foundation, we're all about nutrition as a strong foundation. And I know you understand that too. My question is, can we prevent the metals from displacing the minerals that our body needs by eating a good, solid diet?
Of course. There's a very old saying in the integrative health space, you cannot out-supplement a bad diet. And I've seen that over and over again. I've had people come in, they don't understand. Do my best to explain this to them, to pre-educate them, to get them to commit to changing their diet. When they don't do that, they're often frustrated by the lack of results, and they may not get any results at all, despite taking the supplements, despite even doing some of the lifestyle changes. If you're not eating a good diet, you're going to get sick and die young. It's as simple as that. And it's never been more true because we've got more things in the mix now beyond diet than we ever have in the past. So you have to have that foundation. The Weston A. Price Foundation, the principles that it teaches continue to be reinforced in my practice. I just had on my honeymoon, I just read Tom Cowan's book on the heart and his book on cancer. And my experience completely agrees with his. The best single group of teachings and books for helping people understand how their diet affects their health and well-being. There's a lot of caveats for individual cases and individual people because you're all different. I like to tell my patients, you're all special. You all, like snowflakes, you all fall and you all melt in your own special way. And I say that jokingly, but it really is true.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not a one size fits all diet. It has to be tailored to each person. The higher the mineral density in your diet, generally speaking, the more insulated you are from heavy metals. But the problem with this is that our environment has unfortunately just developed or has a certain burden of these toxins in it. RFK Jr., some of his first big activism was around mercury in freshwater
That's right.
Lakes and rivers and streams in the United States, because there are such high quantities of mercury in these freshwater bodies of water that it's arguably not safe to consume fish from them over the course of one's lifespan, which is tragic and unfortunate. But why is that? Because we've burned so many fossil fuels, right? That then ended up getting hijacked by the climate alarmists who want to turn us all into basically debt slaves who don't have any choices. And obviously your listeners don't want that.
No.
Neither do I. But it is an important thing to realize that the more we burn from underground and the more we refine and extract minerals and ores from the earth, we're paying a price for that in our health, because if we're not careful with where the heavy metals that come along with that wind up, we create a lot of havoc in nature, and that havoc spills over into ourselves and our communities and, of course, our societies, which is part of why I really stress this. Society is losing its mind in part because people are exposed to such high levels of heavy metals, and they're accumulating in people at such high concentrations and doses. And it's happening earlier and earlier in life. And as the mineral density of the diet, the healthy minerals, and not only healthy, because healthy is such a loaded term. You know, you've got, for example, people don't know this, manganese replaced lead as a catalytic agent in gasoline. And I think it was the 1980s, because scientists sounded the alarm and they said lead is really bad for everyone and everything. It's literally dumbing down American children. We have to get it out of out of gasoline, because we're inhaling it. And when you inhaling something is basically the best way to ingest it and make sure you hang on to it, other than literally injecting it straight into your body, right? So this manganese compound it's MMT is the abbreviation. I'm not going to try and remember the tongue twister that is the actual scientific name for it. But your body doesn't use this form of manganese in order to make you healthy and well, right? So there's all these different little caveats for these different minerals. And so we have a very imbalanced mineral environment, minerals in our diet. We have to be cognizant of this. I've seen levels in people now who are taking lots of supplements, who are leading a healthy life, that really led me to suspect that something like their supplements were contaminated, their herbs or other medications or remedies were contaminated, or that they had a source of food in their diet that was contaminated. I think a lot of people think, oh, well, it's probably all these things I hear about, lead in my cocoa or my whatever. I shouldn't worry about that. I can't worry about that. I don't have time to worry about that. There's a truth to it. But the beauty of having hair testing is that it's a very a reasonable way in order to check and see, well, am I actually being exposed to something significant, which has been it's been illuminating and enlightening for me in my practice. And I think it's great peace of mind for me and my patients.
So interesting. Oh my gosh, I had never thought about how our very supplements, the things that we're taking in, may be contaminated. So we may need to look into that. But going back to diet for a second, you use the term mineral rich or mineral dense. I often think of nutrient density, and I suppose minerals are part and parcel of that, but I don't think about what minerals am I getting. Which ones do you suppose, Leland, that are most lacking in our diet?
Well, that is a very interesting question. And it's, I'm going to discuss this more at the conference we're going to be at in June, the Beyond Labels Summit, which I'm very excited to attend. I'll be giving 2 different talks there, and I'm going to unpack this data that I'm going to share with you now. So let's start with copper.
Yes.
Copper sulfate is a pesticide. It is an organic pesticide because it is not a synthetic chemical. It occurs in nature, and so it can't be patented. Something like 270 million metric tons of copper sulfate are sprayed on our food worldwide every year. I am going to trot this math out and really break it down in my presentation. But if I remember from last time I looked at this, that's something like 62 milligrams per person per day globally.
Oh.
That includes 62 milligrams for the, say, indigenous native tribesmen of Papua New Guinea who are not spraying their organic wild foraged food with copper sulfate.
No.
So what that probably means is more like 100 milligrams a day or more is being sprayed on the crops that you're eating. And if you eat organic, you're more likely to be eating this. Why? Because the non-organic farmers are using synthetic pesticides. And I'm not saying that you should go to the grocery store and buy non-organic food. That's not the takeaway from this lesson. But I have no idea how much of that copper sulfate makes it into the public, right? Mm-hmm. What I know is that as I've gone on through my training and learning different things and testing different protocols and having people come to me who've been on different diets, is that what I don't think people are getting enough of is zinc, because it hits way above its weight class as supplements I give. And what I mean by that is that I'll give people zinc, and if they really need it and they're in the right place, it will change their life. And this is not that surprising to people who've been in the integrative and functional medicine world for very long, because you will notice that in almost all formulations of supplements being made by people who are really deep in the literature, and not only the literature, but who are really deep in clinical practice, is there's a lot of zinc in these supplements. Why might that be? Zinc, to my knowledge, is not used as a pesticide. It's not used in agriculture basically at all. Mm-hmm. It's not a pollutant that we're exposed to much in nature in the least. And so I don't see people manifesting zinc excess unless they're taking a supplement. And there's some cases where we see a high level of zinc, but I think it's coming from other imbalances in the body. So I don't see zinc, you could call it toxicity, with anywhere near the frequency that I see huge amounts of, say, copper coming out of people, or mercury, or lead, or arsenic, or aluminum. And aluminum is, I think, by far the one that I see the most persistent and consistent elevations in, for reasons that your listeners probably don't need me to spell out. It's in everything. Mm-hmm. And it's very well absorbed. Let's just put it that way.
Coming up, Leland goes over why it's not easy to identify or eliminate the root cause of sickness.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Earth Runners. Earthing is great. Its benefits include reduced stress, improved sleep, synchronized circadian rhythm, and the countering of the effects of man-made electromagnetic frequencies, because it connects us to the natural EMF of the earth. But if we go around wearing shoes all the time, we miss this connection with the ground and its benefits. This is one reason Earth Runners sandals are awesome. They keep our feet connected to the earth through a copper plug that interacts with the earth's frequencies and transfers it to you through the sandal's strap. Plus, their sandal design allows for a healthy, full range of foot movement, which improves everything upstream in the body. Earth Runners helps us rediscover our ancestral roots via these minimalist earthing sandals. Rewild and reconnect with Earth Runners at earthrunners.com and use the code WISE when you place your order for 10% off at checkout. Again, that's earthrunners.com and the code WISE. And Awfully Good Cooking. Do you wish you were more comfortable cooking organ meats? Join in on a free masterclass led by Janine Farzan of Awfully Good Cooking. Janine helps you learn how to prepare and cook organ meats so that you can feel confident in the kitchen, nourish your family, and have more energy for the things you truly love in life. In this free masterclass, you get to know what all the hype is about regarding organ meats and nutrient density. You learn how to cook any organ, and it takes the guesswork out of cooking them. Ashley, a mom of 4, says Janine's course has been incredibly empowering and a huge confidence boost. Having a better understanding of each organ and its respective cooking technique for palatability is a huge win. Also, in this masterclass, you get the one mindset hack you need to overcome your doubts, plus our collective cultural conditioning against organ meats, and you learn Janine's step-by-step approach for navigating picky eaters, limited time, and tricky sourcing. The goal of this free masterclass is to help get you from where you are now, busy and generally unfamiliar with organ meats, to a place of comfort and ease and familiarity. Go to liverloverchallenge.com to sign up now, feed your soul, and improve your mental clarity, energy, and well-being so that you can do the things that you love in life. That's liverloverchallenge.com. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. So, Leland, do you think these heavy metals like lead and aluminum and mercury and so forth, are they the root cause of many chronic conditions that we face, or no?
You know, it's funny that you asked me exactly that question because I've been thinking about what we mean when we say root cause. Because what's funny about this idea of a root cause is that if you really look at the root system of a tree, there's not one root. And if you find me a plant that has one root, it is a weed, and it is very easy to pull out of the ground. And the more I thought about this, the more I thought about how it did correspond to my clinical experience, which is if you've had a clinical complaint for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 50 years, that is like a plant that has been growing for 50 years. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see happening in people's thinking about functional and integrative medicine, and that's shaped the way that I practice so that I try to avoid this, is that they have this expectation that with one round of lab testing or a couple of consultations, they are going to be able to pull this 10-year, 15-year, 20-year tree out of their terrain. And this is one of the reasons why I was so excited to talk to you about this, right? Mm-hmm. Terrain is a word that you and I both know and love. Tom Cowan, Andy Kaufman, myself, we love talking about terrain because we know that the reason people are sick and confused and struggling today is that their terrain is sick. It's deficient. Mm-hmm. It's demineralized. And when you create the right terrain, the plants you don't want, the things you don't want to grow will not grow. You've got to fix that terrain because if you don't, it's going to just be what I call it the therapeutic treadmill. You're running as fast as you can, trying to deal with this problem and this symptom and that symptom. For me, it feels like therapeutic whack-a-mole.
Yes.
Every visit, it's another complaint, it's another problem. And I feel like I'm trying to constantly just hit the moles as they come up, and it feels very exhausting for me. It's exhausting for the patient. It's exhausting in many ways. It's tiring psychologically. It's tiring emotionally. It's even tiring physically because sometimes people are doing things like, for example, cold plunges or exercise or whatever in order to try and physically compensate, right? And then in the end, it's not sustainable because it can be so tiring. That's why I call it the therapeutic treadmill.
Yes.
And that's where people tend to fall off this treadmill, which is why you've got to change it from a treadmill. You got to get off the treadmill in the first place so that you can actually make progress instead of just treading water.
Oh, that's such a good point.
Yes, it really came home to me as I took care of more and more patients, and particularly as I delve into the minerals, and then married that, so to speak, with my experience in taking care of people with diet and lifestyle changes. Because when you put those things together, that's when you get really significant, durable progress. And that's my goal for people who I help in my practice. And to go back to the tree analogy and the root, right? If you've got a 10 or 15-year-old tree, there's no one root. And it's got a lot of different roots. Now, it might be that the tap root, so to speak, happens to be mercury. The biggest, deepest, strongest root that's holding it into the ground is a heavy metal. but it also might be a toxic relationship or pattern of behavior, an addiction. It could be any of these things. But at the end of the day, one of the biggest things that people need to realize is it's a process. You have to fall in love with the process of creating your wellness from your illness, which is really what, to me, my practice is now more about than anything. And you have to be prepared that taking something that's the size of a 15-year-old oak tree out of your life isn't just a matter of showing up with a chainsaw and cutting it off, right? Because you've still got that stump in the ground. And are you going to grind it? Are you going to drill into it? Are you going to put a wood chipper together? Are you going to attach chains to it and try and pull it out of the ground with a truck? It's going to take some time. It's going to take some effort. And sometimes you're going to feel like you've made no progress. And that's when it's about to actually break free. And you're about to finally round that corner into that breakthrough.
Oh my gosh. I just think that will resonate so much with our listeners. I know it's resonating with me. Like the idea that we're on the therapeutic treadmill and we're playing health whack-a-mole and it's just exhausting. And people want to get off that those million protocols and that kind of exhausting, never-ending wheel, almost like hamster wheel, right? So talk to us about the proactive approach of balancing minerals. Can you go into that a little bit, Leland?
The most important piece of what you just said is that it's about balance. And no two people have the same exposure history. No two people are going to have the same protocol or sequence of protocols. It's an iterative process. We now have a course where we teach people how to interpret these hair tissue mineral analysis tests. That's at stillmanwellness.com. We enroll every quarter. So if you want to learn more about that, go to stillmanwellness.com, sign up for the email newsletter, and you'll get notifications when we're enrolling. And what we do in that course is we teach people not only how to interpret the test, but how to think about the test and how to understand, what does balance really mean? What does it mean to eat this mineral-dense, nutrient-dense diet? Because, you said nutrient-dense and I said mineral-dense, but it's, potato. If you eat a mineral-dense diet, there's going to be a lot of B vitamins in it and a lot of other vitamins in it. And I noticed that as I started to look deeper into the nutrition of what was in the foods I was recommending to people that I saw getting them the results, is that it wasn't just minerals, it wasn't just vitamins, it was both, right? And one of the number one questions people ask me is, Dr. Stillman, can I do it without supplements? And the answer is sort of, but you have to understand that if you're going, the fewer supplements you're going to take, obviously taking supplements randomly at high doses for long periods of time, it's not a good strategy. It is a huge mistake. I can give you chapter and verse on that anytime, but we use supplements very parsimoniously in my practice. And the reason is that they're not necessary for long-term optimal health, right? That's kind of the whole premise of Weston A. Price's work. Where they're helpful is when you have situations in which you have abnormal losses. So somebody who's trying to do it just with food, living in Manhattan, New York City, in all the stress and the hustle and the bustle and the insanity that is New York, you've got EMF, you've got pollution, you've got toxic, crazy people. You don't live a low-stress hunter-gatherer life. You're not out there doing low-level manual labor for 8 hours a day like the Yanomamo Indians of the Amazon River Valley. So I get that you might want to eat that way and be that healthy, but you've got to understand that you don't live in their environment. So why would you presume that you can get away with eating the way that they eat? What we find happening with the supplements is they help people compensate for years of dysfunction, years of mistakes, frankly, in some cases, years of inadvertent exposures. You just didn't know that you happened to live near a Superfund site where there was a lot of hexavalent chromium in the ground, right? We see high levels of chromium on people's tests in people sometimes who are very ill and have never been able to figure out why, because almost nobody checks chromium levels out there.
Interesting.
Hair is one of the only ways to do it well. So that's how we created the program. So it's for anyone who's passionate about learning the deepest level of really, I think, the terrain. Because when we talk about terrain theory on any of the podcasts I'm on and any of the books we could talk about that talk about this, what makes up the terrain? Sure, it's carbon and nitrogen and oxygen, the main three organic building blocks of life. But it's the minerals that we can manipulate, supplement, and that loss of so strongly correlates with premature disease and aging. And the more you dig into that, the more powerful the evidence becomes.
So you and your practice have seen so many clients, you and your team. Do people notice symptoms of this mineral imbalance in our bodies or the heavy metal toxicity, or do some have these things without recognizing it? How does the body let us know?
The absence of symptoms is not the presence of health. The presence of health is robustness, resiliency, the ability to cope with and adapt to stress. And we very frequently find people whose markers and labs under the hood look terrible, who have been rationalizing, well, I've just got a dad bod, or, well, I'm just under a lot of stress right now, or it's just one cup, it's just one pint of beer a night. It's just one pint of ice cream a week. It's just this, it's just that. Well, if I can just do this, it'll go back. But what we'll often see is that people, when you really talk to them, why do you think it's not working, what you're doing? I don't know. I really don't know. And there's never been a more important time to get your health, to get as far away from illness as possible, which means being as far away from the development of symptoms as you can. Because, people, I know your listeners are seeing this, right? The cost of healthy food is going up. The cost of healthcare of everything is going up. The availability of good care, of good food, it's becoming challenging. It's never been more important to make sure that you're in the best shape possible, because it's the one thing you can't walk away from. And unanticipated medical bills due to poor underlying ill health causing some kind of healthcare crisis, it's still the number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States. So, Clark Engelbert and I run the program. We created it together. We've talked about this. We really are passionate about helping people understand this, because it's time for people to stop. It's time for them to stop having to participate in the system because they don't have a better option. It's time for them to really understand what really matters most, not just adding more supplements, not just adding more biohacks or buying more gear or adding more things to their daily routine. How do we make it simple? How do we do it as affordably and efficiently as possible? And how do we also, part of what we wanted to do a course where practitioners can learn is, how do we train a generation of people who can go out and do this to really have an impact? Because, sadly, for better or for worse, conventional practitioners are not waking up to reality fast enough. And there's a huge demand for help in issues like this. Like, for example, we don't do a lot of promotion of my medical practice anymore. And despite that, we still get about 100 people applying to work with us per year, but we're busy with about 100 patients per year. So do the math. 1 in 10 people who applies works with us. It's not because the other 900 didn't want to go through or move forward. It's that we were booked up. So we need people to really become, Hippocrates said, if you're not your own doctor, you're a fool. And people need to really empower themselves now more than ever, because I think the writing's on the wall. The conventional medical system is imploding. The people who think that's a good way of doing life, business, medical care, they are dinosaurs. The asteroid has hit. Their day is coming. Someone's going to have to be there to take care of people when and as the healthcare system implodes due to the avarice, greed, corruption, stupidity, and pride of the current reigning paradigm.
Right. No, it is alarming. And that's why actually our listening audience is growing. More people are coming to the Weston A. Price Foundation because they're looking for these fundamental healthy lifestyle ways that have stood the test of time. And you're inviting us to use modern science, I would say, for this hair tissue analysis so that we can optimize our health in this modern toxic world.
What's funny is it's modern science, but it's timeless. I was actually thinking the other day of how much imagery there is in the Bible about pottery and ceramics. You can't make pottery out of anything. You can't go to the beach and take sand and make pottery. You can't go to a manure pile and take cow patties and turn them into pottery. Pottery is this very unique mix of minerals. And it's the minerals that determine the fact that the clay can be shaped and sculpted and molded, and that it will take a certain temperature to temper it so that then it can stand the test of time, such that you've got ceramics that are thousands of years old, right? body's not any different. I mean, when you really break down what's being done to the global populace with minerals in the food supply, it is, if you asked me to come up with a more insidious plan to make people sick, dumb, and dependent upon the state, I would struggle to come up with something that wasn't just outright poisoning them in the water supply.
Wow.
I know.
I wish we could dive into that further, Leland, but I just have a couple questions and we have to wrap up. The first is, where do most of us miss the boat when it comes to mineral balancing?
Not understanding this concept of balance and biochemical individuality. You cannot because you just cannot go out there and say, well, I heard this protocol will be good for me, I'm going to try it. And part of that has to do with the time scale of effects. What I mean by that is if you stop eating all B12 right now, you're not going to run out for 9 months. That's part of why there's often a honeymoon phase in vegetarian and vegan diets. People are feeling good because they're running on stores of things that have been built up over years and months. They're also getting finally things like magnesium and potassium that tend to be deficient in people who do not eat lots of plants. So this balance concept is critical, and not treating yourself as you deserve to be treated, which is a unique individual with a unique history and a unique current circumstance, and just going ahead and getting your own quantification, whatever that looks like for you. My favorite's hair tissue testing. The reason for that is I can get results with hair tissue tests that cost $100 a pop that people are not getting even when they spend $1,000 in functional medicine labs. Mm-hmm. So we actually drastically reduced the amount of money we were spending on labs in my practice, and therefore on behalf of my patients, by moving to this test, and we're getting better, at least the same quality of results.
Fantastic. Well, I have the feeling I know what you might say to this, but I love to end the podcast with this question. If the listener could do one thing to improve their health, just one thing, what would you recommend that they do, Leland?
Be positive. Be positive. It's the single most important thing I've learned. And sign up for my newsletter at stillmanwellness.com, because we give you a free webinar every week and you have nothing to lose. That's right. Well, thank you for your time. I'm so grateful that you came back on the show. It's great to see you again. I look forward to seeing you in June. I hope I will see lots of your listeners there as well. Our guest today was Dr. Leland Stillman. Visit his website, stillmanmd.com, to learn more. And I am Hilda Labrada-Gore, the host and producer of this podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for today's episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent podcast review from Bodybuilding Nerds Radio. It was titled Truth. This is where you'll find the truth. If you'd like to save your brain, your health, and your body's future while everyone else is falling apart around you, this is what you need to listen to. Forget the mainstream news, the mainstream narrative, and the mainstream entertainment. You'll find only lies and poison in those platforms. Bodybuilding Nerds Radio, thank you so much for these words. You speak truth also. Thank you for empowering us to do the same and for getting the word out to the world. We want everyone to listen to the show. And your review is one more endorsement of this podcast. Thank you so much. You too may leave us a review. Go to Apple Podcasts, click on ratings and reviews, give us as many stars as you'd like, and tell the world why you enjoy the show. And thank you for listening, my friend. Stay well, and remember to keep your feet on the ground and your face to the sun.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.